My name is Lisa Chase, and I'm a professor at University of Vermont Extension, and I'm the director of the Vermont Tourism Research Center. And I want to welcome you to the 10th virtual agritourism gathering. We started this series about a year and a half ago. We started thinking about this series, and then we began a little over a year ago with this virtual series as a way to stay connected during the evolving pandemic. We are planning ahead with these virtual gatherings through May of 2022 with the goal of having at least one virtual gathering each month leading up to the International Workshop on Agritourism, which will take place in Vermont in person. We are really hoping August 30th to September 1st of 2022. So a little under a year from now. And if you have not already marked your calendar, make sure that you do, because this is a conference not to be missed. And I want to assure everyone that we will be implementing safety precautions around COVID-19. We know that not everyone will be able to travel to Vermont in a little less than a year. And we are working on virtual components related to the conference and also leading up to the conference, like this series and today's discussion on building a regional taste, trade, and identity, an international case study on cider. In just a moment, we're going to dive into today's topic. But first, I want to get a sense of who is here with us. So I'm going to launch a poll. And you should see on your screen, let's see, Lee, Rachel, Megan, I can see you. Do you see this on your screen, the poll? Okay, awesome. Looks like a lot of people have already started clicking boxes. You know what to do. Feel free to check as many boxes as the hats that you wear. And I know many of us wear many hats. I also want to, once you finish filling out this poll, I also want to invite everyone to introduce yourself in chat. Go to the chat in the bottom of the screen and make sure that you select panelists and attendees. As panelists, it's really exciting to see who registers, and let's see, we had about 250 people registered for this webinar, representing around 30 different countries. And we were sitting in a room all together. You'd look around and you'd see the incredible diversity and also the amazing accomplishments that we have represented here in our virtual space. However, unfortunately, we can't all do that just yet. So if you are willing to share who you are, type in chat, select panelists and attendees, let us know who you are, where you're from, and also what you're hoping to get out of today's session. I'm now going to end this poll and I'm going to share the results. So you should see the results on your screen. Looks like we've got a pretty good mix, with about a quarter being researchers, and let's see, then a good range of in the 17% are nonprofits, and then we've got 12, 13% farmers and ranchers, government agency, tourism professionals, business managers. A great mix here. And then we do have one other question for you. And this question, I'm launching it right now. This question is, what are visitors most interested in? And these are, I'm going to clarify, these are visitors to cideries. So if you yourself are in the cidery business, then you can think about your visitors and give us an answer. But if you don't work in this industry, we know a lot of people here on this webinar have something to do with agritourism, but don't necessarily work in the cider industry. So you yourself as a visitor, and we've got apples, cider, or orchards, or something else. And you are welcome to type in chat what that something else is. I'll give everyone, I can still see the numbers coming in, so I'll give everyone just another minute to fill out the poll. All right, I'm going to end the poll and I'm sharing the results. And it looks like cider is the winner at 58%, followed closely by orchards at 40% and apples at 32%. I'm now gonna stop my share. And what I wanna do is introduce our moderator today, Megan Larmer. She is the Senior Director of Regional Food Programs at the Glynwood Center for Regional Food and Farming, and she's a board member of the New York Cider Association. At Glynwood, Megan leads projects that convene food and farming professionals to execute training, collective efforts, and creative projects that further the development of a regional food system in the Hudson Valley of New York State. And this includes Glynwood's well-known cider project. Previously, Megan was Director of Strategic Initiatives and Community Outreach for Slow Food USA. Megan has a very broad range of experience in food and agriculture, including many years working as a restaurant professional, farmers market manager, and community garden organizer. And then on top of all that, in her spare time, she is also currently working on her PhD at the University of Exeter's Center for Rural Policy Research, where she is investigating the social dynamics of the local food movement in the Hudson Valley of New York. Megan, I will turn it over to you now.
Thank you so much, Lisa. Thank you for that wonderful welcome and introduction. I'm so excited to have some of my favorite cider people here to explore this idea of cider agritourism with us. I'm gonna just quickly share with you all why I wanted to bring this panel together and some of the discussion I'm hoping for us to have. So as Lisa mentioned, Glynwood is located in the Hudson Valley on the traditional lands of the Lenape people, the unceded territory of Lenape-Hoking. And our work in cider has been really focused on creating that sense of place. So that began actually with international exchanges in 2010. A delegation of apple growers and cider makers went to France to understand better the role of cider in the agricultural system there, and brought that inspiration back with projects that then directly led to the establishment of Cider Week New York, which we are celebrating statewide right now, and the eventual formation of an independent trade association, the New York Cider Association. We continued that international exchange work with a trip to the UK in 2018 to understand the relationship of orchard management to cider, fabulously facilitated with Gabe Cook, who I'll introduce you to in just a moment. And then in 2018 work led directly to work we're doing now, trialing terroir through plantings across about a dozen orchards here in New York State, in a collaboration with Angry Orchard and with the New York Cider Association. We just tasted those ferments from those trees a few weeks ago and are really excited about the data that's going to produce around place. And then in 2019, had an exchange to Spain to visit the Basque people in Asturias, or the Basque region and the Asturian region, to understand the connection between culinary culture and cider culture. And that has brought a plethora of exciting events and opportunities through the cider weeks that we've experienced. So all of that is to say, each of the people who are speaking to you today also work in their own cider place with connections to the global cider community to bring people into the orchards, into the cideries, and really understand cider as an agricultural product, as a cultural product, and use that to uplift the whole network of businesses in the sector. So allow me to introduce them. We're gonna move from west to east in our presentations today. right? So I'm going to introduce, let's do it. I'm going to introduce you all at once and then allow you to talk. Does that sound right? Yeah, okay. So Rachel Fryer is an American Cheese Society certified cheese professional. Her fascination and dedication to fermented milk has led her to found the Cheese Course with her partner Laura Sutter, where they encourage people to rethink the cheese course itself through pop-ups, through consulting on drinks and cheese menus, and telling the stories of cheesemakers, cider makers, and other spirited folks in the industry. Following the trip to Asturias that we were so glad to have Rachel on, she has even more fully embraced her love of cider, becoming the producer of New York Cider Weeks with the New York Cider Association, and currently working as the operations manager for South Hill Cider in the Finger Lakes. And even as I'm saying it, I changed my mind. I'm going to introduce you and then ask you to talk one by one rather than make everyone keep listening to me. So Rachel, we've challenged you to share an image that you think speaks to your cider place, and tell us a bit about that and about what your cider place is.
Yeah. Hi guys, thank you for having me on this panel. I'm very, very excited to be here and talk about cider today. I'm not sure if you can see the image yet, but if you want me to start with the image, Lisa, do you want to put that up? So I cheated a little. I could not decide on one picture to represent how I feel about cider and my place in cider, because I work as the producer currently for Cider Week New York, which is happening right now, by the way, guys, October 2nd to October 17th. So I felt compelled to represent a few of the regions that we are focusing on in Cider Week. So I have a quick collage. I'll go through it really quickly. We have New York City on the bottom. This is a picture from Brooklyn Cider House, where I worked briefly pre-pandemic in 2018 to 19, and we hosted weddings at the cider house. And this is one of my favorite pictures of, just spreading that our love of cider, inspired by a different culture. You see Spanish cedar barrels here, and you see a Brooklyn couple getting married, and as their first catch of cider as a married couple. And to me, this just really represents, the possibilities of embedding cider culture in a city as bustling as New York City. Then we go to Hudson Valley on top. This is a picture that actually I took at Hudson Valley Cider, Farmhouse Cider with Elizabeth Ryan. She hosted us on a trip that we were with New York Cider Association and Glynwood to discover some, Hudson Valley cider. And what this to me just represents, the Hudson Valley is the closest in proximity to New York City. So it is very a popular place for people to go leaf peeping, to experience agriculture, to experience farms. Apple picking and pumpkin picking season is really, really, really popular. And this represents to me not only the colors of fall, but the colors, and this is the first one on the left, I remember was just cider with not fermented, and then it goes all the way through different styles of fermented cider that Elizabeth made and had us enjoy that day. And you just really see the differences of the ciders and the apples, and it's just a really beautiful representation for me of the Hudson Valley. And last but not least, we have a picture of an apple tree. This is an apple tree that is a wild apple tree in the Finger Lakes National Forest, which is the Finger Lakes cideries have become a place that is known for their exquisite cider making, and a lot of that is due to the wild and foraged apples. And you can see a little bit on the right, you have some cows that are roaming in the forest, and if you are going to forage these apples, you have to fight the cows for them. So not to steal from the cows, we are sharing with the cows, but to me, this really represents the Finger Lakes and the spirit of cider making in the Finger Lakes. Yeah, that's, this is my representation. Sorry for not choosing one.
That's great, Rachel. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for that. And you know, what do I expect from getting a bunch of cider people together? You got to break the rules almost immediately. I'd not think anything different would happen. So what I love about the pictures Rachel's shown us is this diversity through the region and one of or through the state of New York. And one of the themes I hope we can get to in the Q&A that I think each of these folks can speak to is the difficulties around coordinating multiple producers with multiple perspectives to really raise the profile of the sector and the region as a whole. So I know some of you agritourism practitioners out there probably have some thoughts about that yourselves. So moving across the Atlantic, I would love to introduce to those of you who don't know him, of which I'm sure there are a few, Gabe Cook, the ciderologist. So Gabe is an award-winning global expert changing the way people think about cider. He's been in the cider industry for 15 years, from cider making to corporate communications and public affairs. He's worked for cider makers in the UK and in New Zealand, everything from very small farmhouse operations up to the world's biggest cideries, and has even presented a bottle of cider to Her Majesty the Queen. He's written 2 books, the newly released Modern British Cider, and established the first UK's cider sommelier program in 2018. So Gabe, I've had the real pleasure of visiting your cider place and seeing your passion for it live and firsthand. But if you could do us the honors of sharing an image that would help to evoke for some of our virtual folks here.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Megan. Thank you everyone for joining. I was just writing down some of the areas of where people are from, as well as all across the USA, from Alaska down to Florida. Not sure how many apples are in Florida, interested to know. But we've also got Italia, Slovenia, Taiwan, South Africa. I've actually just been in Sicily a couple of days ago, staying at an Agritourism. So, you know, it's very apt that we're here today and that I'm talking to. So cider is obviously, it's my profession. It's also my passion, and everything about cider and perry for me, you know, stems from where I'm from. And this is an image of where I am from. This is a 300-year-old perry pear tree with a chap called Eduardo stood underneath. Edu is a very powerful cider advocate from the Asturias in northern Spain, and he came to visit my cider area a few years ago, and we went for a little drive around. And, you know, I suppose that I'm particularly knowledgeable and passionate about the cider making and perry making culture of more broadly the west and the southwest of England, which encompasses a reasonably large sort of area with its own sort of specialist bits. But this particularly, perry, coming from the 3 counties of Gloucestershire, Herefordshire, Worcestershire, a little bit over the border into Wales as well, in Monmouthshire, a very small locale. And where you have trees as magnificent as this is a variety called Greg's Pit. In fact, that is the mother tree, the original tree from which all those varieties come from. And, you know, with this kind of heritage, with this, you know, background, it should be the opportunity that cider and perry acts as an amazing lure for tourism. But it doesn't as much as it should do. You know, effectively within Britain, this is our indigenous wine. Yes, we have great wineries in the southeast of England making great sparkling drinks now, but this is the ultimate cool climate wine, in my humble opinion. And if people knew that we had trees such as this, that had such wonderful evocative stories around them, that produced an amazing drink, it's not in great volume, you don't see it on the supermarket shelves, so it's out of sight and out of mind for lots of people. But if they knew everything about this, I think it would act as an amazing tool for bringing people in. It's absolutely magical. Fortunately, it is starting to happen that, you know, cider and perry is being used as this fantastic tool. There are events such as the Big Apple, which is a fantastic event that's taking place, in fact, this coming weekend. It's in the same village as where this tree actually happens to reside. And it's a celebration of cider and perry making, and it's demonstrations, but it's also displays of fruit. It's also storytelling. It's about telling the story of that place and of that landscape. There are also, within Herefordshire, primary cider county, there are cider cycling routes are offered now, so to provide a novel and innovative way of trying to visit all of these different producers. There are cider stays that are starting to come around. So it's beginning, and some of the larger cider makers, they have a great tourism pull as well. There's also an event, an activity that that I've been involved in. I'll stop sharing my screen now so you can get to see me in full glory, you lucky people. Ciderlands, this fantastic event and activity that Megan might come back to a little bit as well, which is an international network of cider tourism regions coming together to share knowledge and understanding of what has worked well and what can be learned from different areas. Obviously, you know, COVID-19 has put a little bit of a pause on that. Hopefully we'll be able to get back into it in the not too distant future. But there's all sorts of different events. I've just been working in Northern Ireland a couple of weeks ago at the Armagh Food and Cider Festival, the idea of bringing food into the equation, such an important thing for cider that isn't always heralded as being something that should or could be considered to be drunk with food. You know, cider in the UK doesn't always have the best of reputations. And so we need to try and get past that. Cider has a challenge in every single market. In Britain, there is too much knowledge. Dare I say, in somewhere like Japan, there's not enough knowledge, which is why Lee is so important in doing what he's doing. So there are lots of obstacles and hurdles to try and get past. But I think we all have the knowledge and the understanding that this is an amazing drink with really deep roots, that is the most sustainable of drinks, in my humble opinion, orchards being the most sustainable of land-use environments. Absolutely fantastic. And, you know, together with we're having this international connectivity, I think is the most exciting and the most important thing that's come over the course of the last probably 3 years, really 5 years at a stretch. But the fact here we are all around the world having this conversation is a really, really important thing. And we've got so much to learn from one another. So thank you all for attending and joining, and please do send me any questions you have, or do get in touch. Obviously, follow me on Instagram at Ciderologist. Thank you very much. And please buy my book as well. There you go. Link should be in the chat very soon. So thank you very much.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Gabe. So yes, the Ciderlands project is well worth checking out. As Gabe mentioned, it is a network of cider tourism folks and professionals that gathered in Hereford. Which is where I got to meet the wonderful Lee Reeve, who will tell us next about cider in Japan, which was at that time a surprise to me to learn that there was cider making happening in that part of the world. I am no longer surprised by cider making happening in all parts of the world, because it is such a magical and compelling drink and has so many various forms of diversity it can express. So Lee is the owner-operator of Cider Japan, a marketing and promotion creative consulting company, as well as an importer, distributor, retailer, and producer of cider and cider-related goods. He is also the publisher of Cider Japan, which I think the link is going to be in the chat box for you, Asia's first and only bilingual magazine dedicated to all things cider. He is widely regarded as the leading authority on Japan's cider scene, a representative for Japan in Ciderlands, and co-organizer of the Global Cider Connect project, which will be a world first 6-nation cider collaboration to be held in Japan in 2021. So Lee, show us, tell us, what is your cider place?
All right, well, first, hello, thanks everyone for having me here. Don't know how I'm going to follow Gabe, but I'm going to give it a go. Here's my shared screen. How's that? Is that good? Perfect. So I think the first thing after listening to Rachel and Gabe is to point out that Japan, while we do have quite a long and diverse apple history, we don't have the cider history. We don't have the cider culture, as opposed to say Finger Lakes or Herefordshire. So this picture is, I find touching. What it is, it's basically a one-stop souvenir shop for the region's cider. And this particular region is southern Nagano, which is in central Japan. It's the second largest apple producing prefecture in Japan. And it's also sort of right now the capital of cider making, with more cider makers in this area than anywhere else in the country. It's a sort of collage of shots of the same shop. And I think in the pictures that I've got here, it's maybe representing about 10 to 15 different cider makers in the area. Again, cider is something quite new. It's even though it was first being made in the the mid to late 90s. It really didn't start taking off until about 2018. And then it really jumped in 2019, right before COVID took over. It is, however, important to know that Japan, culturally speaking, is sort of conditioned to be aware of regional specialties, including food, especially fruits and vegetables. So as a cider promoter, it was the question was how do we key in this very new product that, according to studies that we've done, over 65% of the population have no idea what cider is. So we used a very typical Japanese model, which is this idea of shops promoting regional specialties, and Pomji does it with cider. We have taken that idea, and I'm now again part of this project called the Global Cider Connect, which is a international collaboration between 5 cider makers from this region of Nagano, and we've paired them with cider makers from Spain, Norway, America, and Australia to again, because Japan doesn't have the experience of cider making that other countries do. We're going to bring these people in. They were going to do cider collaborations, and then the project is sponsored by the Southern Nagano Tourism Board. Unfortunately, COVID again sort of scuppered those plans. We were meant to have them in Japan in 2020. That got pushed back to this year, 2021, but our travel restrictions haven't been cleared yet, so it's probably going to be pushed back to 2022. But the idea is to sort of put a focus on the Southern Nagano region and its cider making abilities. I've got a second picture. Hold on, let's see, how do I do this? Stop share here. So this is the front, it's the cover of a free 8-page brochure promoting cider tourism in Southern Nagano. That's exactly what this Japanese says here. It says cider tourism. Inside the magazine are photographs, articles about the cider makers, about the restaurants, local activities and things that you can do in the area, and how cider sort of goes hand in hand with those activities. I'm going to stop my share now. And I think, yeah, as far as what's happening in Japan, that's about it right now. Yeah.
That's great. Thank you so much, Lee. And yes, thank you also for being so coherent at such an early hour of the morning. We really appreciate it. So, you know, the first thing I'll say is all of these images make me just want to rush out the door and visit these places. I know that we've all been feeling a little cooped up in different ways in the last few years during the pandemic. And I'm going to move into Q&A. So I really invite this incredible group of attendees that we have from all over the world to start popping your questions into that box. And while I wait for those to come through, I'd love to hear a bit about how the pandemic has impacted people coming out to orchards or to cideries, how you've seen it change what agritourism, cider-related agritourism looks like where you are.
I could start.
Sure.
Yeah. I actually moved last year. So a year into the pandemic, that's an odd thing to say, but a year into the pandemic, to the Finger Lakes to work for South Hill Cider as operations manager. The Finger Lakes is a place that inspired me cider-wise. So I was very happy to make the move. And it was fascinating to see, you know, I came from Brooklyn, tiny apartment, you know, very, very, very hard to navigate the streets or safety outdoors. and experiencing everyone trying to leave the city, leave the urban city to the upstate areas and the rural areas to travel and feel safe, and experiencing that firsthand at South Hill Cider, trying to pivot really quickly and make a safe environment outdoors was a success, actually, because that is where people felt safe. To be outdoors, the only thing we knew is that outdoors you can, you're safer. You don't have, indoor was not safe. So having all these, outdoor space, having people drive 4 hours outside of the city to come to the Finger Lakes, or an hour and a half to the Hudson Valley, I know, was really what, saved the cideries that had the areas to host people. A lot of people, I've talked to so many different people that drove to the Finger Lakes for the first time, New Yorkers who drove to the Finger Lakes for the first time in their adult life, just because they couldn't travel anywhere else. And then they said, this is the most beautiful place in the state. How have I never been here before? Enjoyed, ran around hiking and enjoyed the cider and came back every day and really discovered their own state and what their state has to offer. Telling me about all the farms they visited, and came back the next year. A lot of those people stayed in touch and came back the year after. So I think, that was a very positive thing, that kind of a little silver lining in our inability to travel far and, in our typical patterns. Also, a pivot for Cider Week was doing virtual events. A lot of cideries, 2020, we started Hudson Valley Cider Week. We decided to do it all virtual, 100% virtual, because no one felt safe really in person yet. And there was a lot, there's a learning curve, and there was a pivot for a lot of the cideries who've never done any virtual events, or were still a little iffy about social media events, and, trying to hold their hand through the process, and then enjoying a really robust calendar of events for virtual events. So you could actually go and online through Zoom and through our YouTube channel, experience the cideries and experience what's going on, and talk about cider and enjoy cider. And, a lot of online sales as well were boosted through virtual events and cider clubs. I know the laws shifted a little in New York State to allow shipping in state. So a lot of the cideries who never had a cider club before were able to ship cider and create cider clubs. So these were all things that unexpectedly happened and are still happening, and changed a lot of cideries' business models. We know that outdoors, having events outdoors and outdoors is something that's not going to go away. And because we have the space, it's possible. A lot of the cideries are, have a presence virtually now that they didn't have before. And a lot new fans of people traveling in state and literally discovering cider, which is amazing. And so
Awesome.
I'm just talking about the positive, of the silver lining.
So timely about having conversations about agritourism is that people are looking for new ways of engaging, or have found new ways of engaging. I wonder, Lee and Gabe, if you've seen that where you are as well, or any other changes that you might have seen pandemic related to people getting out to interact with these spaces.
Japan we're in kind of we're in a weird place, because we were placed in a sort of state of emergency, which said initially was the same. It was basically a very polite lockdown, asking people not to travel. So that obviously put an end to that. But then we were hit with a double whammy with a blanket ban on alcohol sales. So it just literally shut everyone down for such a long time. And that was, it got worse in April of this year, and it was just lifted a few days ago. So I don't have a lot to contribute as far as the silver linings. I have heard from a lot of apple orchards and cider makers really in trouble because of their apple picking season has basically been it's finished, and they didn't get the revenue from that, and now they're sort of having to figure out how to solve the rest of the year. Because of the state of our state of emergency having been lifted, now everybody is, you know, in sort of mad rush to get out, enjoy what they can do, and we're about to enter about a week-long holiday season where people are encouraged to travel. So maybe we'll have a lot better news after that happens.
Thank you, Leah. Yeah, I had not realized there had also been a full ban on alcohol sales.
Yeah, so that's obviously affected output, and so that the common complaint from people in the cider is that because we're small producers here. I mean, the average is about 1,800 to 3,000 liters per year, and they couldn't, you know, they're really finding it difficult to move that stock. So we're still we're still seeing the effects of it right now.
That makes a lot of sense. Gabe, did you want to weigh in on this question?
Yeah, so obviously a really devastating and challenging time. We fortunately didn't have a ban on alcohol sales. I suspect there would be a full revolt in Britain. We do like a drink or two, as you know. I think from the smallest cider maker perspective, the necessity and the willingness of the consumer to try and seek out more interesting drinks because they couldn't go to the pub, they weren't spending their dollars so much out, they were spending them at home. Online was popular, and lots of smaller cider makers had a direct kind of route to market. So it's actually been quite beneficial for a number of the very smaller producers. What also coincided was that we had never had more staycationers than the last 2 years, people holidaying within Britain. And as part of that, people going and experiencing and enjoying these rural delights of visiting these different food and drink producers. So I think it has sort of shown an opportunity for these cider makers that there can be a direct to consumer opportunity if they've got the space and the inclination and the opportunity, and whether that be extending the open hours on the little shop that they may have on site, whether that be providing some camping space or glamping space, some did, actually the presence of a number of tap rooms on site opening up. So not just as a shop environment, but as a place for people to come to and enjoy and experience those orchard environments as well. So there have been benefits. And again, in that online capacity, there was a question about how do you share cider virtually? Well, actually you do it like this. And when there is guidance, and so everybody has got the same ciders in front of them, and we're talking and tasting through what it's like, okay, no, it's not the same as being in the room with them, but there's a substitution for still having fun and for being an educational thing and for learning as well. And these cider clubs, I think, was another question. A cider club is like a gathering once a month of these things where you do talk through and taste, and whether it be a range of different producers or one producer comes in person or online and talks about their particular kind of produce, just again to instill and engender that real knowledge and sort of passion and understanding. So opportunities are definitely there. It's just about how cider, certainly from a UK perspective, can really capitalize upon that.
That's great. And we're seeing really just awesome, thoughtful questions coming through the chat box. So since we have just about 20 minutes for us to try to address as many as we can, I'm going to try to synthesize some together. So one interest I saw coming up a few times was if you could talk about any agritourism activities that are addressing sustainability, sustainable food economies, biodiversity conservation. Do you see farms and cideries using this as a draw, using agritourism to promote those things? Do you see people taking an interest in cider because of those topics? Go ahead, Gabe. Yeah.
I'll weigh in first of all. Again, as I sort of mentioned in my previous piece, is that just so innately these these places, these cider farms, you know, if we are talking about something that's a bit more vertically integrated, especially, you know, if it's on site and we have orchards there or very nearby, they are by essence fantastic sustainable food and drink stuffs, because, you know, cider making relative to brewing uses much less energy. We've got these trees that are sucking carbon into the ground. They're a no-till environment, but also they're economically viable if the cider maker is making money from growing the fruit and selling for making the cider. But the crucial social element of sustainability of these orchards being environments where people can socialize and have fun. We are allowed to have fun, I think we are still. And, you know, you can picnic and you can share a cider and to share some food. But there are also places for great physical wellness as well, for exercising, going for a run, walking the dog, but also for mental health as well, for peace and tranquility, for mindfulness, for meditation if it needs to be. These are fantastic spaces and places. It's the cider makers who I don't think necessarily understand the value of that, and especially if they're a relatively if they're sort of spray-free environment. Again, I don't think that they advocate that enough to the consumer. And again, that partly comes down to the perception of what cider is in the UK, which isn't always as a particularly high value drink. So there's trying to break through a bit of that perception to, I think, allow this full opportunity to blossom. So there are some cider makers who do place greater emphasis on this, and especially on that biodiversity point of view. But I don't know whether it's transitioned to being a great tool for luring people out to the countryside yet. But it's just they're ready and waiting, I think.
I could speak to, I mean, just the sense of community also locally, where we work with local farmers, local cheesemakers. We do offer our space outdoors. We do have local food vendors coming up and popping up and offering their foods. So it's kind of like a one-stop shop almost, where you're collaborating with other people in the community, where people can come and visit not just the orchard and the cider, but they can also experience local farms and food, and really just local musicians. We do live music at South Hill Cider 2 to 3 times a week, and we have all local groups. So it is kind of like a Finger Lakes experience that you are getting, and a sense of local community. They really appreciate that, and they partake as well. So it's not just tourists, and I think that's a really smart way to do it.
Yeah, I think I would have to agree with Gabe and Rachel. Absolutely. I mean, that's sort of what we are trying to accomplish in Southern Argonaut, where they've got the advantage of many cider makers being in a sort of centralized location with some great restaurants, some great foods, with actually indigenous food, and they're surrounded by hot springs and ski resorts and that. And what we're trying to do is just sort of connect all those dots and give the consumer a sort of one-stop multi-experience which is for other apple growing regions in Japan a bit difficult, because these cider makers are quite spread apart. But getting back to what Gabe said, yeah, I think that these farms and cider makers have everything to offer.
Great. Yeah, I know that I'm certainly seeing in the Hudson Valley, one of the reasons we initiated this cider project was because the orchards that had been here that were historically pick your own orchards in many cases couldn't maintain economic viability, right, as just selling into whole stream markets. So they needed to become pick your own orchards, and then cider was the next evolution of that. And I think this addresses a couple questions that were brought up here around, is the definition of cider changing? We're seeing a lot of co-fermentations with fruits that are coming from across the orchard, and see promoting education and knowledge about those co-ferments, whether it be with cherries or stone fruits or other palm fruits, as part of maintaining the biodiversity and economic viability of the orchards they're coming from. So there's so much learning potential that can happen in these tasting rooms and in these orchards to get to economic viability, which is another question I've seen raised a few times in the chat box. So I want to acknowledge there's one very specifically asking about research and any economic numbers that we might have around cider agritourism's contribution to overall tourism. I do not know of any, and invite answers to that specifically if you have them, or if you could talk about the investments that farmers need to make or that cider businesses make, and whether you see that having an overall profit for them. So I know Rachel works specifically in a cidery that does that. Gabe and Lee, I'm sure you have examples from the businesses you work closely with that maybe you can speak to, basically the profit and loss, is it a good gamble for these cideries to take on agritourism as part of the work that they do?
I mean, the short answer is that it could be, I suppose. It's just that a lot of these smaller operations team, and to have somebody effectively dedicated to one operation that doesn't necessarily at the moment generate a great deal of income, or where there's no guarantee of a large number of visitors, it's quite hard for it to be viable. There was also a question about peak seasonality. The UK, that's summer. Between kind of April, May and September, cider is a big drink for lots of people. Right about now, cider kind of disappears from lots of people's kind of mindset, which is precisely the time when they should be going out and visiting the cideries and learning and seeing that cider is made from apples and specific varieties and these kinds of things. So there is no data about the contribution of cider agritourism because it's pretty inconsequential at the moment. Is trying to instill the idea and the opportunity for the consumers, the visitors, and for the cider makers that there's such a great opportunity here. And it just needs more kind of conversations, I think, and more awareness. And I think that going back to the conversations around COVID, that people are going to be more interested about trying to learn of what is on their immediate doorstep, but then also in their, within their own nation rather than international travel. There is going to be international travel. Again, I think there was a question around that. And sort of virtual events. I think that there is going to be a bit more localism. International will emerge, but people will decide, do I want to do that? Is the cost right? Ethically, is it the right thing to do to be charging around the world with all that CO2? These are really important pertinent questions. So I think that the local element is only going to grow increasingly, and hopefully cider makers will have the opportunity to capitalize upon that.
I could definitely speak to tasting rooms. I think the tasting room model is very, very important to your cider business if you can support it, because it does allow a place for people to learn about your cider, experience your cider. When people are traveling, they're looking for new experiences. So to be able to connect with local businesses and other support avenues for that tourism to direct them towards your tasting room and become part of that community is important and could be very successful. There is a risk that the tasting room can grow into something a lot more than what you signed up for. And then you're dealing with, like potentially a full-on restaurant or full-on venue that needs to be staffed. So, there's a fine border there to really dig deep and see, how much you want this to be about that, not to have the cider kind of, lost, which it never will be. But, we in the Finger Lakes here are on the wine trails as well. So a lot of people come and they want to experience the wine trails. There's a lot of brewery, there are distilleries, and now they're discovering, oh, there are cideries. A lot of people come to the cidery and they call them winery and ask about brewing, but that's our opportunity to educate people. And if you are, a hospitality professional and you are, ready for that, you can really change someone's perception about cider in general. And give them that experience that they're looking for, not just the wineries and the breweries, but you can also offer that to them. And I think that's a really important way to spread you know, the love for cider and like broaden people's experiences regionally. You know, it's not just about the apple picking, and, you know, orchard tours are also very important because a lot of people want to learn, you know, about, they come to learn about the grapes and the vines, and they, you know, if you can offer them, let's, you know, learn about the orchards and how, what the process of this cider is, you know, that's very, very successful. Yeah, it's just, you know, it's a fine line between crazy venue and, you know, and a tasting room that's focusing on a cider. You know, I have noticed that in New York State, I don't know about the rest of the country, but New York State, a very successful model is outdoor tasting with, you know, mobile pizza ovens. You don't need the infrastructure for a restaurant or for, you know, a kitchen, a full-on kitchen, but having mobile vendors or having a pizza truck that you own or don't own, or lease out the space to give people food in your tasting room is also a very, 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 very successful model. You know, there are ways to do it. Yeah.
Excellent. And Lee, I know this may be about aspirations a bit, but I wonder what have you
No, I
seen
think-
from Japanese makers?
Yeah, because again, we're coming from the truth that cider is very new. I mean, we you know, in 2018 there were a handful of cideries. In 2019, it's like we've got over 80 cider makers. But what I can say is that for everyone that are building cideries, they all have incorporated a tasting room, and that particular model works here in Japan. Probably because, again, we're talking about a drink that most people don't know, so they have to experience it before they can purchase it. Space, real estate, obviously quite expensive here. So the tastings are quite small, but they're still a part of the cidery format here, yeah.
Thank you so much for that, Lee. And I think we have time for maybe one more, Lisa. So I'd love to actually start with you for this question, Lee, because Japan has such a unique context and relationship to food as being really regionally connected. You know, that's something that is not a new lesson for Japanese culture, the way it sort of is for folks working within the American drinks industry. So we've had a few people asking about how do you distinguish ciders, right? And I know that this is a hot conversation we could dive into for many hours, but thinking specifically of connecting them to place, what techniques are cider makers using? What types of activities are you up to say, this is this kind of cider from this kind of place, from an orchard, and this is our style, or these are the many styles we produce?
Yeah, that's a hot topic. Indeed. I can tell you what's happening now. Oh, wow, where do I even start on that? What I see happening now is because there's been this explosion of cider makers, because now we've got craft beer brewers that are making cider, we've got wineries that are making cider, we've got sake breweries that are also making cider. And the only way that they can sort of distinguish themselves is by the apples that they're using and where they come from. So there's a lot of now this push for, even the word terroir is being used here in Japan. So terroir, apple varieties. At this point in time, that's about all that they can use, because most of the cider making techniques right now are still pretty much the same. One of the things that we were trying to do with Global Cider Connect was introducing the international element so that we could learn different styles of cider making. One of them, for example, is carbonic maceration processing. So I think that's sort of the next phase for cider making in Japan. But right now, it's just a lot of, you see a lot of our cider uses these apples from this particular region. That's why you've got to, that's why you've got to buy our cider. So.
Good. I wonder, Rachel or Gabe, I feel like you have plenty to say about.
Yeah. So, in the UK, historically, a lot of language has been used to describe cider. Traditional, farmhouse, real, craft, premium, fine, all things that have no legal definition within legislation whatsoever. They are terms that are used to describe the sort of the ideology and the ethos of the product, which is fine. That's what marketing is all about. I'm not anti-marketing at all. But the challenge with cider is that in the UK is that it's seen as a singular drink. Cider is cider. It's like it is a single style of beer. It's an addendum onto beer. So we got a West Coast IPA, you got a New England IPA, and you got a cider. Okay. Whereas actually cider can and does have as great a range of flavors, styles, and occasions as beer and as wine, based upon the varieties that you're using, maybe where in the world you are growing them, and what processes you then do with that cider. So beyond those kind of descriptors, generally ours are just differentiated by being dry or sweet, which there is a level of importance to that. Some people have a drier palate and some have a sweeter palate. I get it. But for me, that is secondary to how does it actually taste? Like, what is the apple variety that's used? Or if you do want to go down to using styles, I do in modern British cider, start to, trying to introduce the concept of it. It's not the first time. It's very broadly aligned to what's happening with the yes. We're talking about tannins. We're talking about acidity. We're talking about fruitiness. We're talking about sweetness. Let's start talking about cider with a language that has some of its own words and does borrow from other drinks, but drinks have always done that. They're not completely in their own silo, to try and get extra language in there so that we can be a bit more discriminatory and a bit more discerning about what type of cider do I like. Because somebody's given a really bone dry tannic cider, go, that's what cider is. Then they go, whoa, I don't like that. But that's let's say an equivalent to a really big earthy dry Malbec. Or what if they were given something that was light and soft and mineral and acid and sort of fruity driven? They might like that. Sauvignon Blanc and Malbec, they're both grapes, they're both wine, but they're chalk and cheese, right? The same as for cider. So I think that and that needs to be done to try and differentiate on how things actually taste for me.
Absolutely. Everything he said. But yeah, the biggest, I think our challenge also in the word cider itself is we're struggling with, I think we're one of the only countries that cider actually just means the juice to a lot of people. We have to still use the word hard cider. A lot of people use the word hard cider to differentiate. People will stop at the cidery and like, do you have cider? And we'll start pouring or telling them about cider. They're like, no. And we mean the juice. That is our biggest challenge. And that is the biggest, re-education that we need to reclaim that word. And then of course, all the different styles. I meet so many people that say, oh, I don't like cider. I'm like, no, you have not found a cider that you like yet, because there are just so many different styles, so many different regions are making different styles now, which is fascinating. The Finger Lakes might be known for more like a higher acidity in their ciders, and there's a lot more flavored ciders happening in other parts of the state. As Megan mentioned before, farmers are growing different fruit and adding their own fruit into co-ferments. There's a lot of co-ferments here in the Finger Lakes with grapes, because this is grape country. Really interesting things. It doesn't necessarily have to be because there's an added flavor to it. It's not as good as a cider that's made as a wine. It's really fascinating and interesting, and it's exciting to be part of this industry right now. And you're having the producers and people trying to define what cider is and how people drink it and how people understand it, and being part of that education. It's really, really exciting. And every time I do find a cider that someone likes, it's a win. And I think it's really, 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 really exciting to see someone learn and say, oh, wow, I like champagne, and this is champagne style cider, and I like Negronis, and oh, I love this bitter cider. And just that education is fascinating to me and really exciting. I hope that was the question. Yeah.
I just want to say again, thank you so much all for being here. This is a conversation that could be and should be continued. We invite you to participate in Cider Week New York, check out the Ciderlands website to see how to connect with that project. take a look at CiderCon, the American Cider Association conference that is happening this year, if you're joining us from North America and are able to get there. And from the bottom of my heart, I cannot wait until I can see you again in your cider places and drink cider with you in person. And until then, this has been a really wonderful substitute. Thank you so much, UVM, for hosting us.
Thanks to all of you so much for joining us today. I want to thank our panelists and Megan for organizing it, Lee for getting up in the middle of the night, literally the middle of the night, and Rachel and Gabe for sharing your stories. And I want to thank everyone who joined us. Wow, we had lots of questions we couldn't get to, and lots of answers in chat, questions and answers in chat. So since we didn't get to all the questions, thanks to those of you who jumped into chat, and there's so much experience and knowledge here in the virtual room with us. We definitely want to keep this conversation going, and we also want to make sure that we continue to have other conversations about agritourism. So to that end, we are building this webinar series, and on November 16th, we'll be talking about agritourism definitions and standards around the globe. And then December 7th, we'll be looking at rural development and women's empowerment. And we're working on a bunch more topics. And we do want to try to make these as interactive as possible. So when you sign up, we encourage you to be ready to type into chat, answer polls, come with questions, send your questions in advance through registration. That's very helpful for us for focusing the discussion. And we will, as Becky mentioned in chat, we will send an email out to everyone who registered with a link to this recording, as well as the resources that were put into chat, the contact info for our panelists and moderators today. And all of that information will also be posted on our website at www.agritourismworkshop.com. So thank you all so much for joining us today, and let's keep the conversation going and hope to see you next month. Thank you.